And we are live.
And we now actually are. All right, we're going to reconvene our meeting and invite TJ Poor from the Public Service Department to join us. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be back. First time this year. Happy New Year to everybody. So TJ Poor, Department of Public Service for the record. And today I'm going to be on the agenda. It's called the RES report, Renewable Energy Standard report that the department did, but really specifically, I'm going to be reviewing and testify on the department's public engagement process and technical processes that we've undertaken over the last 18 months to investigate the renewable energy standard and what we should do going forward. We do have an initial report on this out, and the final report, we got comments on that report, and the final report should be out in the next week. So I have Claire McElveny, our data and equity manager, here on the title slide. She was unable to make it today because she was sick, but I wanted to specifically call her out because she was really behind a lot of the design of our public engagement and the follow through for a lot of this, which was very new to the department. In the past, we would design a policy and hold a public hearing and get a minute and a half of comment from people, and they were the people that could show up. And if they could show up during the time we had the meeting, great. And if not, out of luck, submit written comments. This was a really different approach for us. And it was, I'll say it wasn't perfect. I think we've learned a lot and what we could do better, but I think it was a huge leap forward. And I really commend Claire on really pushing us and pushing me in particular, doing more to really hear from Vermonters and have that shape our proposal. So today we're going to review that. I'm going to hopefully spend about 30 minutes doing that. And then that does lead into, given that public and stakeholder engagement, a proposal from the Department of Public Service that we feel like reflects what we heard from Vermonters. And so I will dive right in. If I can get the slides. Okay. So I am going to start at the beginning. What motivated this? The Comprehensive Energy Plan, the Climate Action Plan. I often start here, so it's not a surprise. But both of these plans say neither of these plans call for a specific solution. Neither of them say we should have a 100% renewable energy standard. The energy plan says we should consider the options, exactly what we're doing here and in this committee and going forward, but consider both a low carbon or carbon-free standard in addition to 100% renewable and the programs that feed into it. The Climate Action Plan says, it says we should develop a 100% carbon-free or renewable electric portfolio standard. So it does not, I've heard over the last year, a lot of people saying, well, the CAP, Climate Action Plan, calls for this. And I just want to make sure that's clear that it calls for the one or the other and consideration of that while being mindful of the economic impact on cost burden Vermonters. Not on this slide, which I will put in future slides, is also Act 154, which is signed, you all passed and signed by the governor in 2022. It's 2 years ago now. That is the environmental justice law, which really called for state agencies to make that leap on public engagement and building policies with Vermonters, not just design policies with Vermonters for Vermonters, not just kind of design the policy without them. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. Okay, so as we design this, before we get into the process, we set out some goals, and we did get feedback on these in the initial stages of the process. But one, we wanted to reach a broad array of Vermonters beyond those who normally participate in this kind of thing. We wanted to create spaces where stakeholders feel they're able to be heard and share their expertise and opinions, not just that kind of minute and a half and it goes into the abyss, but have kind of that conversation and some back and forth. To be transparent in how the feedback is shared and collect in the engagement opportunities. You can This is part of that, but also our report, our initial and what will be a final report will be part of that. And you can see all of our materials on our website, from videos of presentations we did, which included, a ton of time for that type of conversation, to demographic data is available on who actually participated. We really want to be transparent on who's participating. And then lastly, kind of build capacity for engagement in these discussions, because this is not a one-off effort. We are talking about energy policy all the time, and we need to build those relationships and build the capacity at the department in order to continue to do this and continue to help move forward good policy. So the process, 18 months, over 18 months now, I guess, really 3 phases, but there was a pre-planning phase that included, requests for input on how we should design our public engagement process, right? That's just right after the environmental justice law passed. By the end of December 22, we released that public engagement plan and started to move forward. In phase 1, we did a 3-part webinar series to try to build awareness and capacity building. Our first set of webinars had over 300 participants, which I think is unheard of for Vermont energy policy dry subject like this from state government, and really tried to go to ground zero. What is a megawatt? What is a megawatt hour? What do we mean by a REC? And then we had, from that, we built on, well, there was a lot of interest in what RECs are, how they're managed. And so we had another set of presentations. And when I say set, I mean one during the day, one in the evening, so different people could make it. We moved on to phase 2, which had 3 parts. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about these, but we did statewide polling and focus groups, a representative sample of about 700 Vermonters with an oversample based on race. And then from that polling, pulled participants in focus groups. And we had nearly 100 participants in 11 focus groups that were geographically dispersed over the state. That happened over the summer. We had a regional engagement event series, which was in partnership with our regional planning commissions, that we contracted with them to host. The department attended, where we were invited to just to provide, kind of sit in the back and provide technical expertise where asked. But really the regional planning commissions were running it so that we could really try and reach the people that they reach normally, and kind of filter up that kind of their ideas and policy designs and priorities through the regional planning commissions to the department. And then finally, we did technical analysis, which I'll talk about a little bit more, where we had a stakeholder group with 6 meetings that was self-nominated, but we were trying to have an array of perspectives, from renewable energy advocates to environmental advocates to utilities to representatives of the general public, select board members, and then others who are just kind of interested in the topic. And we had a consultant that did a bunch of modeling on different scenarios of possible futures, what the benefits and what the costs would be. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, we're in the process of recommendations and reporting. And this morning, I think, I sent to the whole committee a summary of the Department of Public Service proposal on the renewable energy standard. And I will get into that in the second half of the testimony. I'm going to largely skip this side. This is a kind of a summary of the key learnings. It's on the, it's in your slide deck, and you'll have it electronically as kind of the high level. But the next slide will get into each of these, so I won't say them all twice here. But what I'm going to do next is go through those 5 key learnings from our public engagement that we've extracted from it. So first and key takeaway number one is that affordability, reducing carbon emissions, and reliability were consistently highlighted as the most important issues to prioritize. So we asked the poll of 700 responses, what is the subject is how important when considering how Vermont gets its electricity. So, reliability is very important. Is it somewhat important? And participants in the poll could choose that. And you can see in the statewide poll, reliability of electric service and affordability for consumers were considered very important for over 80% of Vermonters, and at least somewhat important by nearly all people who took the survey. Not pictured here is across the regional events and conversations in the focus groups and stakeholder advisory group, the need to reduce emissions was elevated as a really important priority. We had, it's noted on the slide here, but one of our regional planners who was organizing events observed that it seemed like the energy engaged stakeholders, those who kind of already are in the industry or just like close to the issues, seem to focus more on emissions reductions, and they kind of assuming that affordability and reliability would be taken care of. Thought that was an interesting observation and worth pointing out here. The flip side of that is less energy engaged stakeholders focus more on the affordability and reliability. And so all of these things had over 50% importance. So it's like everything is important. And we had some of this is difficult to choose. Like what's the lesser of, I was going to say two evils, but maybe it's six evils, but, everything is important. So I want to prioritize everything. And so it kind of illustrates some of the balances, but there was kind of a clear rising to the top of some of these priorities. We took this and said, okay, well, you got to rank all of those things as somewhat important or not important, but what if you had just your single most important issue? What's your single highest priority? And in the statewide poll, we had 29% said that affordability is the single most important factor when considering how Vermont gets its electricity. Here, you even see reducing carbon emissions comes up to 19%, and then reliability, those three again remain at the top. On the right-hand side, there's a difference between those who, the 92 people, nearly 100 people who came to the focus groups. Sorry, I apologize for checking my phone. My son got braces this morning and he was calling me earlier and saying he's in pain. So I wanted to just make sure it wasn't him with an emergency.
Cheer up, it gets worse.
Yeah, well, my daughter's getting them in 2 weeks. So they're both two in that.
You want to live here probably.
Yeah, I'll just stay here. Was I saying about lesser of two evils? On the right-hand side here, we see this is a sample of those who participated in the focus groups and what they said initially and then after the focus group. Now, in these focus groups, we had a consultant that ran them. Again, the department was attended for technical expertise. Some meetings we didn't say a word, and some meetings we were asked to be more engaged. And so kind of the before and after difference here, where affordability was more important after the, in follow-ups, and reducing carbon emissions was also more important in follow-ups. And so it kind of gives you some sense of where people's priorities were, both just kind of that general representative sample, and then after a little bit of discussion and capacity building for those participants. And this is all still the first takeaway in affordability, emissions, reliability. in particular in the this gets to what I was saying about it being challenging to choose the priorities. So we heard a lot of discussion about a desire to see more local community scale projects. And so with that, so it's affordability, reliability. In those general polls, in-state did not score well, but on the other hand, there still was a desire in discussions and in the focus groups, in the regional events, to see community projects. And we'll talk about that a little more as we get into our proposal and how we respond to that. I'm going to go into the second takeaway. I don't know if I should pause to see if there's any questions on what I've gone through so far.
Representative Logan.
Thank you, Chair. Do you have demographic information about the folks who participated in the process?
We do, yes. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can send you the link to it.
Oh, yeah. Is that available in a link that you put in one of the slides here?
I don't believe it's in these slides, so I'd have to
Okay.
separately.
Okay.
It's on our website. Okay, so the second takeaway here is this one's really from the technical analysis that we did. And I mentioned the broad array of participants. We had a contractor, Sustainable Energy Advantage, who is well known in the region for providing renewable energy market analysis, conduct analysis of what the costs and benefits of various scenarios were. Now, there were 6 scenarios that were decided upon by the stakeholder group. I take that back. There were 4 scenarios that we engaged kind of a small set of stakeholders, including REV and the environmental community and utilities, in the request for proposals for a contractor. But we left open 2 scenarios for the stakeholder advisory group to decide upon. And so I can go into the specifics later. The important thing for this slide that I want to communicate really is that a move to either a 100% renewable or a clean energy standard from the current policy faces trade-offs. On the right-hand side, you can see the societal cost test. So you see societal benefits in the light green bars versus total costs. And so societally, any one of these scenarios has societal benefits. On the left side here, you see the cost increase in rates to Vermont ratepayers as an average over time. And so there's a trade-off. The takeaway here is that what we're deciding on and where we decide to place emphasis is how much societal benefit do we want to acquire, and how much should Vermont pay for that societal benefit? So,
Representative Tory.
Yeah, just, I don't know if you can do this quickly, but what goes into societal benefit? What, like public health, what types of things are included in?
yeah, so avoided emissions is the biggest societal benefit that is in here, and that is valued using the social cost of carbon. And that social cost of carbon includes a whole array of benefits that I believe, but I shouldn't say it here, but I believe it includes a component of public health. And so it's like all of the damages, estimate of all of the damages associated with climate change, and apply it socially. So there's also societal benefits include, there's some value to renewable energy in kind of reducing market costs. And I could get to I'll try not to get into the dynamics of kind of the wholesale electricity market here, but if you reduce your load, you essentially reduce energy costs for everybody in New England by a little tiny bit. And so if you reduce your load a lot, then you reduce for everybody in New England a lot. those benefits don't accrue to Vermont. They accrue to, others in New England. And so that kind of shows up on the societal side. It does not show up on the Vermont rate impact side. And so those are the biggest two. There are other societal benefits. We have in the full report, and I can pull it up here really quickly. I do have it on another set of slides. If it kind of a stacking of what those benefits are. And that, if there's time, maybe we could go into that if you're interested. I could go into it now if you're interested too.
I think at the end, maybe if you have time.
Okay, great. So on the left-hand side, you see 3 to 5% across the scenarios. So that's average over time. And one thing I will say is that this does not include any costs associated with any distribution or transmission investments that are needed because of distributed generation penetration. And we've been working on that value over time. I could give you a guesstimate, but I don't think that would be appropriate to do today. But I can say it's not going to turn this into like 50%, right? And so I want to be able to kind of continue in the conversation. I want to share it with all the people who have been working on this before we actually testify here, because I feel like it'll be a good back and forth to get a better number for you. And I also, it's not appropriate to surprise them in all the work that's been going on over the last few months. We don't have that. We've been working with utilities to get some data on kind of what they're expecting for that kind of investments. And then we don't want to kind of double count things that would happen otherwise, right? If there was a project that needs to be replaced in 5 years because it's a 40-year-old transformer, well, we need to account for that in the analysis here. And so there's just a lot of complexity there, and I want to just hold that out. There are a million assumptions in these modeling, right? And that's why we had the stakeholder advisory group, so entities could actually provide feedback on those assumptions. And we've modified some, even to our, some of them to be Vermont specific, kind of against our recommendations of our consultant, in fact. And so that's related to renewable energy costs, because we really want to try and get a reasonable estimate of the cost of Vermont in the future. It's not going to be right, by the way. It's an estimate. So I'll leave it at that. I probably put too many caveats on it, but
I'm curious. We're talking about 3 to 5%, impact over business as usual. What is business as usual? There's a range of per kilowatt hour that customers pay across the state of Vermont. Can you tell us what that range is right now?
Well, it depends on, there's a range, kind of a tail block. Retail rate for residential customers goes from anywhere in the low teens, not even teens. I think some municipal utilities are in 12 or 10% and 10 cents a kilowatt hour up to 24 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's kind of the range. But this range is really business as usual is our power supply portfolio as it is now with the current renewable energy standard in place, and assuming an increase in revenue. So Vermont ratepayers, all customer classes, pay somewhere between $900 million to $1 billion per year in rates. And so that is assumed to escalate over time with a number of factors. And that's what we're comparing it to. So we're saying, okay, this is the change from that $1 billion over 10 years, that's $10 billion, 3 to 5% of that, which is 1 billion would be 10%. And so $300 million is 3% of $10 billion. So it's 3 to 5%. Those are small numbers, but if you take the actual dollar amounts, they are very big numbers.
So has the department done just a small side jaunt here for a second, just along these lines? Has the department done any kind of side-by-sides with expected savings from decreased fossil fuel usage?
From the, yes, so these are net.
Household budget to a house, so.
Oh,
We're using less gas, less heating oil, and, because we're, going for beneficial electrification, we are seeing increased costs on the grid because we're having a hard net, because we're adding a bunch of resources. Have we done kind of a side by side to understand like the net impact?
The household level.
Because you're gonna spend less on fossil fuels, is your point.
Yeah,
I think the energy plan, the pathways analysis, those types of analysis are that comprehensive. This is kind of the net costs to the energy industry as a whole. We've done analyses saying, if you install a heat pump today, here's what the difference is going to be. The Agency of Natural Resources led a project on what an Energy Futures Group did the analysis on the clean heat standard and different options. I'm sure you'll be hearing about that. And so there are some analyses of the cost of those, but they're all bits and pieces, and not, except for the energy plan and the climate action plan, they're not the comprehensive picture.
just ask one follow-up. So in your opinion, TJ, great process that you ran here, by the way. So how would we get that kind of comprehensive look? What would you, if we wanted to have a good comprehensive kind of looking forward, what would you suggest?
I think it happens.
Who does it?
I think it happens. I mean, the next best. It's a good question. I think it needs to happen. I don't know if this is the next one or the best one, but it needs to happen in the next climate action plan update, right? Which is due July of 2025. And the technical analysis of that probably over the next, that's only 18 months away. So I think that is probably an opportunity. I think one of the reasons we pull it apart into pieces is because it's like complicated and like hairy, and it's really challenging to kind of all these moving pieces going together. So I think it is pretty big effort. That's how I'd answer your questions, like that. Action. Okay, so societal benefit, Vermont costs. I'm gonna just set that for this slide. Our third takeaway in terms of good time check. Okay. Preferred sources of electricity, general support for solar, wind, and hydro. There was support. Over 50% of Vermonters supported all resources. Storage and load flexibility considered highlighted as a key consideration, particularly in the stakeholder advisory group for this technical analysis that we did. And I just want to be clear here in our total look right now. We've narrowed the focus to the renewable energy standard as it is. Load flexibility, of which storage is one part of, that I think is the next step. So there are additional costs to load flexibility and storage, and we want to be sure that we're accounting for each individual cost and the use cases of that load flexibility and storage properly. If you say, hey, we could reduce these costs from storage, but then you ultimately use the storage to defer that transmission investment that Shana was talking about earlier, then it may not actually help with the renewable energy standard costs. It depends on how you use that load flexibility. And we've actually proposed a study to take the next step in that process here. And I'll get to that, I promise. Again, on preferred sources of electricity, these are the regional planning commission. Some of them came up with on their own this asking their participants to do a pie chart of what they think the future should look like. I don't know if one of these are yours. I don't know. Okay, good. Or maybe it should be. I don't know.
TJ and I were at the same.
Yeah, I did not submit one to be transparent here. The takeaway from this side is that there was a diversity of desires here, a diversity of portfolio, a diversity of resources that people were interested in, and a diversity of pie charts that reflected that.
Yes, Representative Bongar.
Confused. When, for instance, it said wind, did that imply in-state wind or just wind just coming from wherever?
I think you should circle back.
Well, I'm not sure what this person was thinking with that. So I think it could be either or in this. So I think some people, like the one on the left was specific about offshore wind.
Just wanted to know how the question was asked, whether it was asked that way or whether it was asked. Okay.
Yep. The next takeaway is that many Vermonters were at least somewhat supportive of policy and program changes that increase requirements for low carbon and renewable electricity, and then also in a way that supports low income Vermonters. This is again from the follow-up survey, this chart. So 92 participants, those that did the focus groups, can see that 89% were in support of help for community solar or disadvantaged communities. So I think that general movement of state policy, the legislature towards kind of equity is kind of really showing through here, and the support for vulnerable Vermonters is really paramount. And then this is the last takeaway, and we'll get to the policy proposal. So as we consider going forward, and this is really from the technical analysis, the chart shows scenario 2, which is really aggressive in-state renewable generation, that, you know, in the winter months, we still have a deficit when we're talking about our consumption versus our supply. In the summer months and, you know, early shoulder months, we have a huge surplus. And so that better matching supply and demand has got to be something we figure out over time. We're not quite ready to do that right now in terms of both the tracking system for renewable energy credits and how we track renewables in New England. The tracking system isn't there yet. They're accounted for quarterly, but it's not structured correctly. And then going to even more granular than that, monthly or hourly, we need to really better understand some of the implications of that, and then how load flexibility can really help. Or generation flexibility for that matter, curtailing power at certain times could help as well. And so we really see this kind of mismatch growing over time in that. So we've proposed a study to kind of investigate further here. One more note about storage and load flexibility is a lot of times right now that is very short term. So this problem on a monthly basis, right? If you charge a battery that has a 4-hour capacity in May, it doesn't necessarily help in December, right? And so with long-term storage and kind of other forms of load or generation flexibility are really important to look at as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You keep mentioning we proposed a study. What does that mean?
Thank you, Gabrielle. It's almost like we.
You're welcome.
Sorry for the informality. Okay, so all of that feedback the last 18 months for the Department of Public Service we've taken all that, and this is what we feel has reflected that stakeholder input. And we'll go over this quickly, as quickly as I can. We're recommending going to 100% clean energy by 2030, maintaining the current requirement for 75% renewable by 2032. What I mean by clean energy is Essentially, in shorthand, it's the renewable energy we have now plus nuclear. And the reason for that is when I think about affordability, reliability, and emissions, well, 100% clean is more affordable than 100% renewable. The modeling shows that. I can get into some details. It's not a huge, it's not like the biggest component of cost in this modeling by a long shot. It's one of the smaller ones actually, but it is there. For emissions, there's zero difference between 100% renewable and 100% clean as they've been proposed and talked about. Zero difference, and that's both for the Global Warming Solutions Act and for actual societal emissions. Somebody mentioned earlier, I think, that it's really, well, our analysis is modeled based on only new renewable energy actually avoids emissions. Existing plants are good, they have value, they're important, but only new renewable energy avoids emissions. And so 100% renewable, 100% clean makes no difference towards our GWSA obligation. It makes no difference for societal emissions. It does make a difference for affordability. The other piece of that is reliability. Nuclear is a baseload resource. It recognizes that ISO New England relies on these resources for reliability. Vermont utilities have paid a lot of money to maintain the Mystic generating plant, which is in Connecticut, over the last 2 years. It was going to retire because it didn't make enough money in the markets. And so ISO New England signed a kind of out-of-market contract that cost Vermont utilities a significant amount of money, like $100 million. And so over 2 years. And so this recognizes that we have contracts with nuclear through 2034 already. And two, even if we sold the attributes for that and replaced them with existing renewable attributes, we're still contracting for it. And even if we got rid of divested of that contract, that nuclear plant is pretty likely to stay in New England. So it kind of recognizes that the reality that that resource is providing value to New England and to Vermonters. If folks are anti-nuclear, there's a whole lot of other issues with nuclear, then that is a very clear reason not to support 100% clean. It's straight up, right? But that, on balance, if it's affordability that's being prioritized, if it's reliability, and if it's emissions, we felt like that was the best starting point here. I'm going to run through quickly the rest and then we'll go for questions. I imagine that one has a lot of questions, but 30% renewable energy by 2035. Now that is made up of 15% tier 2, so an increase to tier 2 by 2035, and 15% a regional tier, which could come from Vermont also. So it's 30% new renewables. That triples the requirement that we currently have, which is 10% new renewables. So actually tripling the requirement. How do we pay for that? Well, we're going to pay for it with changes to the net metering program. The changes that we're proposing are a little different than just getting rid of group net metering. It is to change the compensation mechanism for net metering, to authorize the Public Utility Commission to change the compensation mechanism so that all excess generation, that would be those group projects or generation in excess of your consumption in a month, are compensated at basic avoided cost, which is a term for what the utilities could otherwise buy it for. And so that would that effectively right now is likely to end group net metering, which I know is a different proposal on the table, but it does it in a more nimble fashion. So if those avoided costs actually increase, well, there may be a role for group net metering in the future again, if that excess generation is worth enough. And so lastly, almost lastly, to replace that, I talked a lot about community solar and a desire for those community projects, proposing a utility procurement process where 10 to 15 megawatts per year for the state are required to the utilities themselves. So not the state, like the standard offer, there's a lot of inefficiencies to that, but the utilities themselves need to procure 15 megawatts of energy that is community prioritized. And what I mean by that, I think there's some room for design on this. Ideally, the legislature would give some guidance to the commission to design this. But what I think of as community are projects like those for schools and municipalities, those for affordable housing, those for projects for low-income Vermonters, and those for projects that are developed by organizations or communities on their own. There's a organization called Acorn that I think it's in Brandon that they've kind of really got community support.
Middlebury. Yeah.
Middlebury. I should have known that. Sorry. That is really kind of building that community support for a project. And so the procurement mechanism reduces some efficiencies. The utilities can say where they want it. It's possible that they're bigger projects and smaller projects. That's going to cost more than avoided costs, but not as much as net metering. And so with net metering, I feel like there's a little angst sometimes about access for net metering. But if access is really the goal, there's a whole lot of ways to get access, and net metering, it has been the most expensive. And so we want to ensure we're still having access, but through a more efficient means. And then really finally, additional study and reporting requirements to understand the impacts better for the T&D system, and opportunities for more granular reporting. What I mean by that is that supply demand kind of mismatch, and really understanding how we can solve that better. The department's proposal, we estimate to have about a 1% rate impact over the 10 years. And so we have felt that this really balances what we've heard from stakeholders, that we are interested in increasing requirements, but we want to do it affordably. We want emissions reductions as a priority, and we want reliability to be maintained. And so that is the proposal.
Representative Sibilia.
Yes, thanks, TJ, and thank you very much to the department for the process that it was actually incredibly thorough and expansive and impressive that you did that. We took testimony this morning, or heard testimony this morning, from all the members of the working group. I know you participated in those meetings as well, but in particular, we heard testimony from the HFA on the affordable housing and concerns around net metering. And so I want to see if you can talk a little bit about the way that affordable housers use group net metering now versus the proposal that the department is putting on the table, and what the differences are, and who pays, who benefits, that sort of thing.
So group net metering really, I can't speak to the specifics of how affordable housing owner actually uses group net metering, but I can speak to group net metering in general, in that a customer or a group of customers get a credit on their bill. Presumably with an affordable housing, that is kind of passed through, since they're master metered, it gets passed through to the customers. So with our proposal, what I would one way it could work is that the utilities put out a request for proposal. There's a priority focused on affordable housing. And so their selection criteria requires perhaps, a certain amount of it to be dedicated to affordable housing, or, over time, they have to meet a number of these parameters. And so what the proposals they get back will be competitive proposals that, can propose maybe want a bigger project than 500 kW net metering cap that then can be allocated to customers. And so if an entity proposed, for example, a project, they could say, we will do this for 13 cents a kilowatt hour, but it cost us 10 cents a kilowatt hour to build, but we're going to give that 3 cents to our tenants as kind of lowering the cost of their electricity. And so I see that as different in that it's a more efficient process to build. They can have a bigger potential projects to get economies of scale. And they could also I lost my second point there. It also allows that affordable housing entity to kind of transfer those, just deal with the credits themselves. And then on the other hand, it's less expensive than the group net meter. And so to the rest of ratepayers, whom otherwise would be paying a higher rate for the same potential benefit project.
I had a couple of down there first, Representative Pat, then Clifford, then Logan.
On what we were just talking about, I actually have a second question, but on the net metering, would utilities that this would be excess energy above and beyond what they need because they have a full portfolio of 100% renewable utilities, wouldn't that be adding to everybody's cost if they had to do that?
So the proposal, first, one clarification that I didn't put in this slide, but I think is in the summary that I provided, is that similar to the legislative working group proposal, that utilities that are 100% would only be obligated to comply relative to their increases in going forward. Regarding net metering, in that additional cost, as it would because net metering compensation would be going down, so current net metering, that this would be less expensive than the current net metering situation.
Okay. My second question is on the nuclear energy. I understand the attraction to people who understand that there's no emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. But in this process, do people get informed that the high-level nuclear waste remains lethal for tens of thousands of years and has to be dealt with at some cost?
It was, this was one of the discussions in the focus groups a lot. I can't speak to, the polling where people just filled out the poll. It was not, that was more high level. But in the focus groups, when nuclear was discussed, the trade-offs in nuclear were really, it was one of the more discussed items, I would say. So
as long as people are aware of that when they're considering the trade-offs.
Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, TJ. A lot of good information here. Question I have is, when you said at the beginning that you had stakeholders, and then you also polled 700 some odd people, right? Was there a breakdown as to whether any of them were actual homeowners or not?
I don't recall if that breakdown. I can follow up.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I'm just curious.
No.
And maybe just like the slide here, maybe I'm just reading this wrong. 100% clean energy by 2030. is that just with the standard, or people would have to actually comply with that?
That's the utilities would have to comply with that through the kind of the same way that they
Okay.
comply with the renewable energy standard now.
Thank you.
Representative Logan.
Thanks, Chair. Are we planning to have Kathy Byer from Evernorth? And okay, great, thanks. So the changes to the current net metering program recommendation that you're making, have you looked at the impacts of adopting a policy like that? Similar policy decision was made in California. And the impact of that policy decision was essentially that there was an 80% reduction in voluntary installation of solar panels because the incentives are reduced for the consumer. So it seems like we need more conversation about that in order to determine, what the benefit is. I understand the argument that asking consumers to other ratepayers to subsidize the cost of solar power primarily for people who can afford it already is unjust. But I think that what we have to, we're still going to have to incentivize the adoption of solar power somehow, or else people won't do it because of the upfront costs.
So to answer your initial question, I think our proposal would reduce the amount of net meter solar in Vermont, for sure. It effectively group projects right now under current prices. Right now, group projects would go away, and that right now historically we've been at about 25 megawatts per year of net metered solar. That's like 80 to 90% of our renewable energy standard obligations. And so the key in our mind is to ensure that the access to renewable energy remains, and which is why we propose this alternative to ensure access. And I don't know, we have not done the analysis to see exactly how much, but we did make assumptions in our modeling that said, well, if we go to avoided costs, that's going to reduce the amount of net metering by this much. That would be replaced by other solar and more, because we're going to 15%. And it just matters kind of who has access to that replaced solar, and which is why we proposed this alternative for community.
Any further questions for Mr. Ford? Thank you. You've given us a lot to think about.
If I could, one last concluding thought is that I think this is really complicated. And so there's a lot of good proposals on the table. And I know there's a lot of competing legislation that has to be done, but I urge the committee to take the time that it needs to kind of really work through this, because we only want to do it once. We don't want to be back next year and doing it again in the next biennium. And so we spend 18 months doing the stakeholder process, and hopefully it doesn't, hopefully we take the time it needs.
Thank you. All right, members, with that, we'll adjourn tomorrow. We are going to be coming to committee 15 minutes after the floor tomorrow.